Right, it's happening again. Last week, we reported about some crazy stuff happening with AMD's Strix Halo APU. So think of this as kind of like a super high-end integrated processor. It's got like 16 CPU cores, 32 threads, 40 RDNA 3.5 compute units. It's a monster of an APU, and it seems that the community is intent on putting it into extremely small form factors in order to produce best gaming handheld ever. Now, here's the thing, right? OneXPlayer have actually come up with their own concept, and I think it's probably a bit more sort of viable for the chip itself. But it's basically a flagship gaming and AI tablet, the Super X. It's using AMD's Ryzen AI Max Plus 395 APU, which is pretty much the top-end Strix Halo. 14-inch, 2.8K OLED screen, up to 128 gigabytes of memory. So, Oliver, we're kind of like eagerly awaiting how Strix Halo is going to sort of potentially work in a handheld.
Yeah.
But this one, it's kind of this one sort of makes a bit more sense, right? And it's sort of more similar to the Asus product that's already out there using Strix Halo.
Yeah. The kind of key difference between this and the Asus Flow tablet is this goes all the way up to 120 watts, whereas the Flow tablet, I think, is normally only 60 watts. You can push it to 80 watts in so-called manual mode. So this is definitely a faster device, but probably also, you'd presume, a thicker and heavier device as well. But I really do like this chip for tablets as opposed to handhelds, like you said, because it has a great range of operating power. This can be a great chip at 120 watts. It can also be a good chip at 10 watts, even in some of the handhelds that we've seen. It's single chip. It's very easy to cool. It's got great CPU performance. It's got very good GPU performance as well. It also feels like a really good fit potentially for like ultrabook style laptops, very thin laptops, where you want good GPU performance, you want good CPU performance, but you'd realistically never fit a good quality discrete GPU in that kind of system. But here we should be talking about RTX 4060, potentially our 5060 class performance pretty easily, I would suggest, and probably tracking pretty well with like a PlayStation 5, as you've shown in your Plague Tale benchmarking from the other week there. At 120 watts, at least at higher wattages, it should be there. And given that it has I think a 2080 by 1800 display, that should be a reasonable target for a lot of software using that kind of GPU with some upscaling technologies. Plus, it has 120 gigabytes of RAM, which I'm quite fond of. My system here, my Mac Studio, has 120 gigabytes of RAM as well. And if you do any kind of like serious video editing, photo editing with some multitasking thrown in with lots of applications open at once, you can actually start to use a large portion of that RAM, which is quite useful. So for various professional applications, maybe less so for gaming, but for certainly various professional applications that you might be executing on this kind of machine, especially if you're using it as kind of like a desktop replacement, laptop replacement, tablet replacement, all these different hats that it could potentially wear, that could be quite compelling there for professional use cases. It also has, I think I'm reading here, 2 Thunderbolt 4 ports, which is very nice. I have a bunch of Thunderbolt devices around here because I have Macs, obviously. And Thunderbolt is a fantastic standard for displays, for storage devices, all kinds of external PCIe connection. It's a really terrific standard. Also potentially for like eGPUs, although I don't suspect you'd really need one with this kind of hardware on tap. Just a very flexible and very capable standard for expansion that, because it's so common in Apple land, there's tons of Thunderbolt devices out there, even if it's not as common in the PC world. And if you're into Windows tablets, I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of Windows tablets, but if you're if you're interested in a Windows tablet, I think this looks compelling. I'd also consider the Asus Flow device, which is obviously similar in a lot of respects to this device as well.
Absolutely. Tom, what do you think?
Oh, I'm a big fan of this sort of stuff. If I was in the market for a sort of tablet, sort of a Surface style tablet hybrid, I'd go for something like this. I think more for the sake of creativity, productivity, work stuff, professional stuff than gaming. As Oliver says, it's kind of like, it seems better suited for that use case. In terms of form factor, in terms of the use of Strix Halo, it's a huge silicon, but it's got the surface area to really pack it in. Unlike the handhelds, which you guys covered quite recently, the GPD Win 5 and the with the huge battery pack on the back, which you had to kind of attach. and the Air Neo next to. But yeah, there's not much information. I mean, it is 12.5 millimeters thick, which is pretty good. That's pretty respectable. In the photos, that bears out. Vapor chamber in there to cool it down. And as Oliver says, the 120 watts TDP is scalable. If you don't want to use that can scale to whatever type of project you've got going on. But it's definitely compelling. It's kind of between. I think the Strix Halo kind of works very ideally for mini PCs, very ideally for like a console type of form factor. But, going the other extreme with handhelds feels like a stretch too far. Tablets and laptops feels like Ultrabooks feels like a very good middle ground for this sort of stuff. Yeah.
Interesting. It's also got a VRR on the display, on the OLED display, which is pretty great, I think. I mean, the reservation I've got. I mean, I have been testing this device, which has got Strix Halo in it, right? And I'm really sort of happy with it. I think it's really cool. I don't really have a huge amount of time at the moment, what with the all of the independent stuff going on to actually get that review done. But I'm liking it. The only criticism I really have of it at the moment is that the fan is loud at like full 120 watts. So how this like super thin tablet is going to handle that, I don't know.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's very different forms of cooling, so hopefully it's decent. But yeah, I just love the little announcement video they've done. This time we're going all in. That kind of like sums up what Strix Halo is all about. It's kind of like, just kind of nutty what people are trying to do with all of with this like really powerful APU, and then trying to get it into as small a device as possible. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah.
The A&E one I'm particularly interested in because they're aiming for a fully integrated handheld there. And to be fair, some of their devices that they've done in the past, they have I think they've managed to get 56 watts through on their handhelds. So that should still be a pretty potent amount of horsepower there with Strix Halo. And obviously not the full 120 watts. But
I think the GPD Win 5 is within 10% or so in Fire Strike of an RTX 4060. At about 55 watt TDP, 57 watt TDP as tested in the video that they published.
A desktop 4060
was that? Desktop 4060, I believe so, yeah. You're getting a pretty good percentage of that scaling when you look at the lower wattages there, potentially at half the wattage, half the maximum wattage. You're getting a pretty compelling result, I think.
Yeah, there is going to be. It's the big sort of max P versus max Q debate, really. Which is sort of where does the silicon operate at its peak efficiency level versus peak performance. I guess that's what they're aiming for on this one. There's been some good sort of testing by the Forks on this, and I'm sure he's going to continue to be on top of all of these handheld devices because that's what he does. But I'm just loving it. I just love the fact that I don't know, maybe obviously it's a niche case device. Yeah, it's a niche device, right, for a small audience, but that's kind of what PC gaming's all about, really. It's about the diversity of hardware out there. And I just love the fact that somehow a business case can be made for these devices because they are going to be quite expensive, right? Especially we're using Strix Halo.